So for those of you who are not familiar with our member photo show, this is a little bit different than our normal monthly program that we hold. This is a chance for members of the Portland chapter to share photos of plants that they've taken over the past year with one another and talk about them. So I'll just briefly explain like what the agenda is for the evening. To start, I'm just going to have an introductory message, just take care of some housekeeping. Then we have 9 presenters this evening, so we'll get through them one by one. Each person will have 7 minutes to get through up to 20 slides. Just a reminder to those speaking, I will stop you at 7 minutes just so that we stay on time. Keep things moving out of respect for others who need to present. After your 7 minutes, we'll have a couple minutes for questions. So folks will be able to send me questions in the chat. And I'll field those questions to the presenters. So a little Q&A section after each one. We'll take a couple minutes for questions before moving on to the next person. Then at the end of the programming this evening, we'll have a chance for everyone to unmute and come onto camera and just meet each other. Back in the day when we had in-person meetings in Southeast Portland, we had social time built into the programming, and now we make time for it at the end. So I'm going to start just by reading a couple messages from the Portland chapter president, Willow Elliott. So the first notice is just a reminder that we're holding our annual hike leader planning meeting on Zoom this Sunday, January 12th, or sorry, not this Sunday, but Sunday, January 12th, 2 to 3:30 p.m. This is an opportunity for folks who want to lead or are interested in co-leading field trips in 2025 to learn about how to do that. No experience is necessary. If you're interested, contact Chelsea Rosebrook. Her information is in the December Calicortis newsletter, along with the Zoom meeting link to attend. And even if you can't attend, but are still interested in co-leading a trip or leading a trip, and you just want to send Chelsea the destination and dates you're interested in leading a trip for in 2025, you can go ahead and email her at her email address included in the December Calicortis. And we'll probably send, actually, I'm not sure. I guess we have the December Calicortis as a combined December-January Calicortis, so you might not get a January reminder. The next notice is that we have upcoming board elections happening early next year in February or March. And we're looking for new faces to join the board. Several of our board members are finishing up their terms, and 8 roles will be open for new volunteers. Terms would start in February or March 2025 with plenty of coaching provided by past board members. There are few requirements to serve in any of these roles besides being an active NPSO member and a willingness to learn and serve with passion and respect. If you're interested in learning more or want to add your name to the election ballot, please contact us via the chapter website at portlandnativeplants.org or npsopdxchapter@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. So we'll just go ahead and drop the chapter email in chat if anyone is interested. That will connect you directly to Willow, our current chapter president, who can help point you in the right direction and talk about the roles that are open and those that might be a good fit for you. So with those out of the way, I'll go ahead and start sharing the presentation. So our first speaker is Greg. Let me just unmute Greg.
Hi, everyone.
Greg, I'm going to make you a co-host so that you can come on camera if you want. I'm going to go off video. Okay, Greg, so just give me the heads up when you want me to transition to the next slide, and I'll do it for you.
Okay, well, go ahead. The first several slides are from a location that is a bit off the beaten track. Actually, it's way off the beaten track. It is Spring Basin Wilderness, which is it's north of John Day, or sorry, not north of John Day, but near the John Day fossil beds, near, well, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. There is no signage, and I don't remember how I learned about it, but it is now an annual ritual, or maybe even several times. The main thing that I like about going here is right on this particular slide, and that is the abundance of the hedgehog cactus, the PDO cactus. There are hundreds of them. This is one particularly nice display. There are other plants well worth seeing here, and the views are incredible, as you'll see in the following slides. Another benefit to going to Spring Basin is solitude. Because of the lack of signage and the fact that it's really fairly remote, there are never going to be many people. When my wife and I have visited, we have never seen more than a total of about 10 people for the entire day. And there are a lot of places where you can see 10 people in the span of 5 minutes or even less than that. So I can't say enough great things about Spring Basin Wilderness. If you have not been there, please check it out. You can get more information about it at ONDA's website. That's ONDA. Kieran, you can go ahead. So more cactus, and this is one of many bee bottoms that you're likely to see. The bees just love the cactus and they dive bomb. They treat them as their own personal bathtubs. I didn't have, this doesn't really support videos, but I have a number of videos where the bees dive down, go out of sight for 20, 30 seconds. You can hear them buzzing up a storm in there, and then they eventually come zipping out covered with pollen. It's great fun. And they're completely oblivious to the human gawkers nearby. You can go ahead. This is another plant that I really enjoy seeing at Spring Basin, the yellow-haired paintbrush. This only, well, it's endemic to the John Day area, the John Day Basin area. So you can also find it at Sutton Mountain, which is nearby. It's just a few air miles to the southeast. And due south is Painted Hills, and you can find it there as well. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, this doesn't bloom, but it's a little bit earlier than the cactus, so it's hard to see both of them at the same time. But this is one small example of the longleaf phlox, which carpets some of the meadows and hillsides at Spring Basin. This is looking north, so you're looking toward the Clarno unit of the John Day monument. Those humps, the darkened humps sort of in the distance. And this is one example of the views. Next slide, please. Another example of the view. And I wouldn't call this a balsam root destination per se, but there is a fair amount of Carey's balsam root that blooms here. Next slide, please. And this is the last one from Spring Basin. So this is very close to Horse Mountain, which is the hiking destination. It's an out and back, unless you want to do a rather challenging loop, which includes some cross-country route finding and other things that I'm not sure that I would recommend. Anyway, this is facing due west, and there's really, the views are enormous. There's no photograph, pano, whatever that could capture them.
No signal.
Oh, yes. And also no signal. And that is the end of the Spring Basin Wilderness portion of my presentation. And this is completely different. This is at Saddle Mountain. This is an endemic. It only blooms at a couple places in the state of Oregon. And I credit Adam Schneider, who I don't think is on this call, but he has persuaded me of the value of going to certain familiar locations early to see certain flowers that only bloom early, like alpine ones. So this is an example of such. Next slide, please. This is not, no, these are not rare plants. I just tossed this in here because I happened to be very lucky on this day and I was above the clouds. Next slide, please. Another one of the, I wouldn't call it rare necessarily, but definitely uncommon, the dwarf primrose Douglasia, which blooms up very close to the summit. Next slide, please. And also the kittentails up near the summit. Alrighty. And I guess we can just, yeah, the pink fawn lily. That is in early May. And let's zoom past the Darlingtonia, because everyone knows about Darlingtonia, I hope. Yes, the aliens. And that is just, I don't know if that's a pollinator or not, but we have to look at the very last slides. So you can go ahead. Yes, most people, everyone here I know knows about Cone Peak. This is prime time. Over the last several years, I have started going here much earlier because, and next slide, please. I have fallen in love with the steer's head, Dicentra uniflora, which is smaller than a penny. And skip ahead 2 slides, please, as you can see. And that is 7 minutes.
Thanks, Greg. So we have a couple minutes for questions. If anyone, I've re-enabled the chat. So if folks have questions that they want to put in the chat for Greg, I'll start a timer for a couple minutes. Greg, if you have anything you want to keep sharing as we wait for questions to come in, go ahead.
Oh, no, because this is the last slide, but well, sure. I mean, I'll mention that in late June, if anyone has not seen the Dicentra uniflora and is interested in seeing it, and I cannot say enough good things about this teeny tiny little snowmelt plant. I have a sort of unscientific method that seems to work for me in terms of seeing them in bloom. For those, just as a reminder, Cone Peak is located near Tombstone Pass, east of Sweet Home. And what I have done is rely on the Oregon Snowtel network to give me an approximate time when these are in bloom. So the closest snowtel is called beargrass, one word, doesn't really have anything to do with the plant that we're all familiar with. The number is 1166. And what I have found is that when the snow level gets to, yes, it is actually, it's just across from Iron Mountain. I have a question. Is it near Iron Mountain? And this is actually part of the loop. You can do a loop hike starting at the Tombstone Pass trailhead, which includes Cone Peak, and then you continue the loop to Iron Mountain, and it's about 6 miles, and it's a moderate hike. On a clear day, it's beautiful. You get awesome views from the observation platform at Iron Mountain. And
Greg, I'm going to stop you there because we've hit our 2-minute mark for Q&A.
That's cool. All
Great.
righty.
Well, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Okay, David.
I guess we're ready to start off with Darlingtonia. Andrew and I go down to Eureka, California a couple times a year. We're trying to do botanizing more along 199 as we head over to the coast. And in August, we went from O'Brien And if no one knows where O'Brien is, it's a little community with a black and white old antique police car sitting out front the store. Took the Weimer Road out of O'Brien, southwest out of O'Brien, went up and over Oregon Mountain down into Patrick Creek along 199. Next slide. Whiskey Creek is a great place before you climb over Oregon Mountain to dabble your feet in the water, look at a variety of insects, and do some botanizing in a bog just after the road crosses the creek. Next slide. The sooty darners are quite common down there. I think it was the only one we saw, and it was pretty abundant. Next slide. At the bog, there's a patch of Rhododendron columbianum that can be found there. I didn't spend too much time looking in for other plants. This was the object of my attention. There's a couple other places along the road where there's seeps that you can also find it. Next slide. The Slichter burn was 4 years ago. Burnt a huge area south of the Biscuit Fire. And there's a couple of little patches in Hawaii, they'd be called kipukas, which are old vegetation surrounded by new lava flows. Well, in this case, it's a burned area, and you have, because of the serpentine soil, there was little vegetation on it. So what was there did survive. Next slide. These fires are now more typical than we want them to be, but they are huge, burning big swaths, and will have a significant impact on native plants down there, in my opinion. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. There's Rhamnus californica is one of the plants that is coming back quite readily, along with California Bay and big leaf maple. Next slide. These are a couple of the natives that we saw down there. Even though we were not at the optimum time for blooming, we were able to still find some endemics. Next slide. Unfortunately, I didn't put the scientific name down, so don't ask me to say it. But looking through the rocks in the kipuka, we were able to find several endemics. Next. This is fairly common in wet areas. Next slide. The Siskiyou Mountains willow herb was blooming, and quite a nice little find for us. Next picture. Next picture. This is not a great picture of Howell's lomatium, but the plant was not looking too terribly happy. Next, yeah. Fontana grasshoppers are somewhat common. We found a few down there. Insects are not terribly common, but some interesting ones. Next. The pink-faced jewel beetle was found in a rather large manzanita. Flew in and I was able to find it. It's a bupestrid. Next picture. And you go up and over Oregon Mountain, and once you start dropping down into Del Norte County, the forests that survived last year's fire and previous year's fire is quite different, quite a sight. And it's really kind of cool to see. So I recommend anybody going down to Northern California via 199, take that detour, and you'll spend several hours. In fact, we want to go back, spend all day along the road. So, any questions?
And I've reopened chat to everyone, so folks should be able to just type questions directly into the chat without having to direct message someone.
Yeah. Yeah, we've also, I can talk a little more. We've also botanized along 199. The Myrtle Creek Botanic Area is a great stop closer to Hyuchi to see some natives. 199 comes out at Crescent City, goes between Grants Pass and Crescent City. And the Smith River Gorge is really spectacular. So pretty cool. The Siskiyou Mountains have a high degree of endemism, and everybody's got to go down there and visit and just wander around. A lot of botanical areas. So
Paul wants to know, is this the road from near Rough and Ready heading southwest into the mountains before dropping into California?
it's actually at O'Brien. So yeah, it is fairly close to it's O'Brien's south of Rough and Ready, I think. So yeah, you turn right at the O'Brien store when you see the black and white police car. The bubble, yeah, with the bubble light on. You just turn on the north side of the store and head west, and then generally south. So you can find it on the which one?
It's a gravel and dirt road.
Yeah, it's a gravel and dirt road, and yeah, but it's passable for regular cars.
Great. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate your taking the time.
Cool. You're welcome. Thanks.
Mike.
Why?
Okay, Mike.
All right, I finally got it unmuted.
Great.
Last fall, I got into photographing fungi on our property. We live in the East Gorge near Mosier. This is a typical setup with the camera mounted on a rail to make it easy for adjusting working distance and clamped to a tripod that is designed to make it possible to put the camera in just about any awkward position desired. Next. This is the result from that setup. All this and all the following photographs are what are called focus stacks. They're not a single exposure. They're multiple with small adjustments, shifts in focus between them. Sometimes 20, 30, maybe even 40, 60 to 80 exposures that are then assembled in software to produce the final image. Next. The Amanita are like the first to arrive, and they're large and conspicuous. They show up below the cottonwoods near a pond, and have always caught my attention. This past fall, I decided to go exploring our property to see what else might be coming up in the way of fungi next. And they're sort of the first to emerge and the first to disappear. But I continued searching the property for other possibilities next. I all of these are done with just available light, no artificial light. Some people do play with artificial lighting of fungi and backlighting elsewhere, but this is just, and then of course, it's hard for you to tell scale except for things if you know the texture of moss, for instance. They range from, anyway, move on next. The IDs are all preliminary. They're based on image recognition in iNaturalist, but some have now been confirmed by identifiers. Next. Another advantage to focus stacking, besides being able to get the entire subject in sharp focus from front to back, is that you have control over where the in focus ends and the character of the out of focus background by picking which would be the last frame employed and also the aperture used in the lens. Next. And so this exploration of what was actually emerging on our property was a revelation in the number and variety that we've been living with all along, but we're unaware of. Next. And a wide range of, I guess since I was treating these as sort of subjects for art rather than science, also sort of struck by just the emotional impact and the sense of just personalities. Next. This one was, you might say, outspoken. I spotted him at considerable distance, bright colored and large. Next. And besides, well, one of the things I do too is spend a lot of time inspecting rotting logs and their support a lot of fungi. I'm struck by just the diversity too of their reproductive strategies. Next. The other thing I've noticed since I've continued doing this fall is that compared to last fall, this fall, well, even the Amanita, they emerged briefly and then that was it. And in searching for fungi this fall, I was struck by the reduced quantity and variety. For instance, this log I revisited, there's no sign of this bear's head of fungi at all this year. Next. And some are pretty constant, including these, but both the variety and quantity is much lower this year. Next. And next. I was going to say there's the contrast in temperaments from something as small and delicate as the preceding, and then this very robust emergence out of the underground. Next. And next. I'm struck too by just the wide range of, colors, textures, and the like. And so it is just objects of art. Fungi are endlessly engaging. They're also sort of easy in a way because you have a well-defined subject. A lot of photography, especially landscape photography, can be a challenge, to create something engaging, but when the subject may be not so obvious as, like a person or a mushroom. Next. I occasionally use maybe in this case, some aluminum foil down below the mushrooms just to scatter some of the skylight back up to level, even out the lighting. But other than, reflectors and that sort of thing. Just the available light has been quite sufficient. Next. And I guess for scale here, you can depend on the Douglas fir needles and their cone in the background. I just keep thinking, and we'll finish with that. No, go ahead. And this will close it out. There are also some tricks I found, when you're, well, briefly, the process is the images, it might be a stack of 60 images are imported into Lightroom, and tonal adjustments are made to one of the set, and then that is just duplicated to the others, and then they're handed off to Serene Stacker for alignment and stacking. And then the result of that is handed back to Lightroom for more editing and the like, occasionally handed to Photoshop for some steps that might be better done in Photoshop than Lightroom. So oh, and one other thing, the camera I'm using, and it's not the only one that'll do that, has a focus stacking function where you set focus to the nearest point in the image, then set the number of focus steps and the size of the steps, taking care that the size of the steps doesn't exceed the depth of focus of the lens, and then let it go. And it chugs away through the full stack. So and at least for the camera I'm using, that process of capturing the stack is automated. It'd be quite tedious if you had to do it manually, but
I'm gonna stop you there, Mike. Thanks so much for sharing. And we've run into our Q&A time. So I'm just gonna go ahead and keep things moving along to the next presenter.
All right.
Okay, so Gabriel is on the way back from a conference and gave me a script to read on his behalf. I believe he is in the meeting, but just listening from the road. So for those of you who don't know him, he's a botanist at PSU. He works for the Oregon Biodiversity Center, Berry Seed Bank, and the Center for Lakes and Reservoirs. And these are photos of his from the past year. So this year, a group of botanists from the Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, and Oregon Biodiversity Center surveyed for Malheur wire lettuce or Stephanomeria malheurensis near Burns, Oregon. This species may be extinct in the wild, and the seed bank at PSU is one of the few places on Earth where individuals of the species may still be alive as seeds. Malheur wire lettuce is just difficult to distinguish from one another or from other co-occurring wire lettuce in the field. Here they were too early to be able to see flowers or fruits, which help with ID. Others went back to this spot and collected samples for identification in the lab, and it is yet unknown if this is actually Malheur wire lettuce or is its common co-occurring lookalike. Here is a rare coastal plant, California sea lavender or Limonium californicum, at a salt marsh in Yaquina Bay. This species is threatened by sea level rise and hybridization with exotic species. Pictured are fruits of russet cotton grass or Eriophorum camisonis. The white cotton-like fibers are connected to fruits and aid in the wind dispersal of seeds and are characteristic of this genus. This wetland plant is rare in Oregon, but more common elsewhere. The last rare plant of the talk is dark-eyed gilia or Gilia milfoliata. This plant is very rare and threatened. It occurs in coastal dunes and has small but pretty flowers pictured here. Here are seedlings of dark-eyed gilia grown at the USDA Plants Material Center in Corvallis. And here are seeds of dark-eyed gilia. Now we pivot to pictures of wetland and riparian surveys in Eastern Oregon performed for the Bureau of Land Management. These data help BLM and staff do restoration and manage cattle on federal lands. Pictured here are staff, staff are training on how to collect the heights of plants. This is an example of the riparian area they surveyed. Here's another example of wetland area that they surveyed. And while staff got to see some cool wetland areas, it wasn't all fun and games. Pictured here is a fire that started near a sampling site. Get out of there. Now we pivot to plants propagated at the seed bank by Roxy and Kat, talented seed bank staff. Pictured here are seedlings of Indian wheat or Plantago patagonica. Many species in this genus are edible. Here is threadleaf fleabane or Erigeron filifolius. This common east side sunflower grew well from seeds and is a pollinator-friendly plant. Seed bank staff also propagate things from stem cuttings. Here is giant goldenrod or Solidago gigantea cuttings that have formed roots. Plants are finished in 4-inch pots and considered done when the football holds the potting soil, like a root ball holds the potting soil, like this little sagebrush or Artemisia arbustula. They were also able to grow a few paintbrush or Castanea species by seed, including this one that flowered. And I think I screwed up the caption on this one. We don't think that this is Castanea hispida, it's a different species. Now we pivot to aquatic invasive weed work done by the Center for Lakes and Reservoirs. This year, CLR staff found a few state records, including Cape pondweed, shown here. CLR staff were alerted to this population in Tillamook by an iNaturalist post. CLR staff confirmed this species, and an herbarium sample was submitted to the PSU herbarium for documentation. Here's Cape pondweed's flower. If you see this plant in the wild, call the Oregon Invasive Species Hotline or post it on iNaturalist. Yellow floating heart or Nymphoides peltata is an aquatic weed that threatens Oregon's aquatic habitat. PSU graduate Ashley Newcomb is studying this species. Here, her and Jacob Rose are collecting data at known infestations near Corvallis and the Willamette River. CLR staff were able to document a second state record this season. Pictured here is sessile fruit arrowhead or Sagittaria rigida, co-occurring with wapato, which it is closely related to and resembles. Sessile fruit arrowhead differs by usually having unlobed leaves that are not arrow-shaped and sessile fruits. At this site, it occurs in slightly deeper water than wapato. Here are the characteristic sessile fruits that are directly attached to the fruiting stem. Thanks for listening. So Gabriel isn't really available to take questions for the Q&A, but we'll thank him for sharing his photos and the script for me to read. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next speaker, who is Lecia. So let me just unmute Lecia here.
Now okay, am I on?
Yep.
Alrighty. Well, as many of you know, I am not a botanist and I am still learning. And so every year, as I set up some of the bio blitzes starting in the spring, it's always interesting to see what we find flowering each spring. And so we document those on iNaturalist so that we can compare. So part of setting up the bio blitzes is the different categories of plants. And so we always have to remember to include the full angiosperms. So here we have a lovely Acer macrophyllum starting to branch out or bud out. Next. So again, I do a lot of comparisons. And so what's neat about the osoberry, which is one of the first to bloom in the springtime, is that they're dioecious, and meaning that there's male and female plants. And I will take critique about which this one is. I believe this is a female. And what happened is, this was probably up at Whipple Creek, and April 1st, we always go to Kanema. And this year I couldn't show them side by side because they had already fruited at Kanema. Next. So the next 3 slides are 3 different spring violets, okay, that are all yellow violets. And I have this one as being the evergreen, or the Viola semiviron. Partially the leaf shape, the texture, and how they run along the ground. Next. This one is one that I have not seen as much as the other 2, and this was actually on my son's property up outside of Sandy. You can see even that the inflorescence is a little different, and this is the orbiculata, and indeed those leaves are very rough. Next. And here is the most common that we see with many names, the Viola glabella. And I always tell people this is glad to see you, because again, it's one of those early violets. And note the distinct heart shape. Next. So again, one of those precursors to spring is, when is the red flowering currant going? Oh, Paul, I really think it's the orbiculata, just because of the difference between the 2 leaves, but thank you for that comment. Maybe the first one's orbiculata, but it's definitely different. Okay, so on the red flowering currant, typically, at least by April, you will see them everywhere. And we got lucky. There's only 1 patch up at Whipple Creek in Ridgefield, and it was a good spring for it this year. Next. Okay, so we have a couple of the trilliums. This is the standard Trillium ovatum. And again, it's like, when are they going to pop? And in my yard and in my woods coverage in March, it's normally around St. Patrick's Day. Next. This year, there were 2 different spots that I went to see the Trillium albutum, the giant white wake robin. One was in Washington and one was out in Washington County. So that's your clues for those. That's okay. Go ahead. Next. And actually, this is beyond Washington County now. This was an area, and even though I grew up in the Willamette Valley, I guess normally I was in pastures with my horses and they'd eaten all the flowers. So this was an area outside of Sheridan that was one of the field trips for the annual meeting this year. And a lot of restoration had happened. So in my mind, though, this is, even though they're very careful in procuring their seeds, they still are what we call at the backyard habitat, kind of nativars. So there was such a variety, though, and it was just gorgeous. I could have done 100 different species that day, but I only had 20 slides. So obviously a lupin. So go ahead and go to the next. And then this is our very endemic Kincaid's lupinus organis. And I just said rainbow because it does have these very unusual colors. It's certainly not as flashy as many of the other lupin species. Next. Oh, 2 minutes. Okay. So as this one I have down as the Lupinus albiflorum, otherwise known as the sickle leaf. Again, these were a slightly different area than we were before, but also in the Sheridan Hills. Next. And I wish I would have had more slides, but this, I believe, is the Lomatium utriculatum, rather than the Bradshaws or the Tritornatum. Those to me are the three that can be found on the west side. Next. Again, I'm not even going to try really to figure out all these different checker mallows or Sedaceae. I had this one down as the Vergata or the Asperella malvifloria. Certainly take suggestions on that one. Next. And who can deny the beauty of a crimson clover? And if people don't know this, crimson clover is a cover crop, but it's also used in silage for cattle. Next. And in this field, there were so many variations of the camas. And this one was really, oh, this one never got changed, Kieran. Okay, so here we have our lectilinei. And then sometimes the subspecies Sextorphia comes up. And so I would love Jason or Paul or anybody out there to explain what a Sextorphia variation looks like. Next. And here's our beloved Calochortus tolmii. Next. And again, this one is kind of confusing. I think it's the Iris douglassiana, and because it was tall and open, but supposedly we don't have them around here, although I seem to see them in many places. Next. And oh, I love going up the Salmon River to see this Corydalus, Schuyler's Corydalus. It is fabulous. So join Mary Hayden Saturday on the annual meeting and you'll get to see them. Next. And big name for a little plant, Hosakia rosea. And this is one that I found on my son's property. Very fun. Next. And back home, after planting this 10 years ago, I finally had blooms. So that was exciting. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. We cut into our QA time to finish that, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next speaker, who is Roger. So I'll take a minute and unmute Roger.
Slide 1, please. In June, my son, who lives in Atlanta, and I took a trip through Alabama. Our first stop was on the Cahaba River, shown here by the red dot, about an hour southwest of Birmingham. Slide 2. The Cahaba is a beautiful river with ferns, flowering plants, and trees growing along it. What looks like rocks in the water at the far end of the river are just that. Amongst the rocks grow the rare Cahaba lily, which is found only along a short stretch of the Cahaba River. Slide 3. This very rare lily, the Cahaba lily, Hymenocallis coronaria, is one of 60 species of the genus Hymenocallis called spider lilies that grow in the southeast US and farther south into South America. Slide 4. They live in shallow moving water along rocks. They are pollinated at night by moths. Pollinated flowers fade the next morning and new flowers open each day. Slide 5. Let's come closer to home and a more common plant. This is common sword fern, Polystichum unitum, known by everyone in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Slide 6. But perhaps less commonly known is the life cycle of ferns. The largest structure you see there in this picture, located on the left side, is the fern we know called sporophytes. They produce spores in the asexual reproduction part of the fern life cycle. A spore grows into a gametophyte, which is visible on the right side of the picture. Gametophytes are small, one-cell, thick, heart-shaped organisms that produce male and female gametes that unite in the sexual reproduction stage of the fern life cycle and grow. When the male and female gametes unite, they form an organism that grows out of the gametophyte to become the ferns that we are familiar with. On the bottom left is a small leaf growing out of the gametophyte. That leaf will destroy the gametophyte as it grows out of it. For years, I've tried unsuccessfully to find a gametophyte. Rick Shorey told me he's seen lots of them on Beacon Rock. I've been up and down Beacon Rock and not seen a single one. Of course, what I should have done is brought Rick Shorey with me to show me where the gametophytes are. Slide 7. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, a fabulous garden I recommend to anyone who can get there. They have a hothouse fern exhibit. It has a sign explaining the fern life cycle and says that in that exhibit, you can see gametophytes. I looked and looked and looked and could not find one. I asked one of the garden employees in the exhibit to show me a gametophyte. She said she wouldn't show me. I had to find it myself. I took that to mean she didn't know what a gametophyte looks like, and I remained frustrated. Slide 8. During the pandemic, I started walking a lot on the trails of Forest Park and have continued to do so. On the Alder Trail, which is not labeled in this picture, but is just under the Things to Do label at the top, I came across a large root ball from a tree that had fallen over. Slide 9. And here is a picture of the root ball along the Alder Trail. Slide 10. In the spring, when I would walk by the root ball, I would see many small sword ferns, sporophytes, growing out of the root ball. The small green plants you see on the root ball are young sword ferns. Since sporophytes grow out of gametophytes, there had to be gametophytes on the root ball at some time in the year. Each year I would walk by it earlier and earlier in the spring, but all I saw were these little sporophytes. Slide 11. November 1st of this year, I found several small, one-cell thick, heart-shaped structures, gametophytes. Slide 12. I came back 15 days later on November 15th to get more pictures of the gametophytes with a ruler to show their size. To my surprise, in the intervening 15 days since my first sighting of a gametophyte, the gametophytes were either gone or a few remained with small sporophyte leaves starting to grow out of them. Slide 13. Anyone wanting me to show you the gametophytes, please contact me and I'll take you to the root ball and we'll see if any gametophytes remain. And anyone interested in additional cool information about the ferns of Oregon, keep your eyes open for a half-day introduction to the Ferns of Oregon class that I hope to be teaching for NPSO, possibly in June of this year, perhaps a few weeks after the annual meeting, followed by a field trip either to Mount Hood or the Gorge to see ferns in the field. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Roger. If anyone has any questions for Roger, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. Roger, in the meantime, if there's anything else you'd like to share, we still have some extra time, so feel free.
That's fine. No, I hadn't
Well,
I hadn't realized I'd have a little time for an addendum. I have nothing
okay,
planned.
great. I have a question for you. I'm not sure if you know the answer, but I'm curious if you know more about how the sporophyte destroys the gametophyte. Do you know, have any idea how that how that process works?
It just physically grows and destroys the gametophyte in the process. Its leaves and its
Oh,
roots grow into well, they start in the gametophyte, and as they get bigger, the cells of the gametophyte get destroyed.
great. Thanks. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but thank you so much, Roger, for sharing.
Thank you all.
Okay, our next speaker is Paul. I will unmute Paul now. And Paul, you ready to go?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This past May, Susan and I did about a 17-day trip to Germany, primarily because Susan is a avid genealogy person, and so she had a chance to visit some of the countryside that her ancestors grew up in. And after that was concluded, we decided to strike out on a hike and enjoy some of the nature in Germany. And so we left our group in Frankfurt and took the train along the Rhine down to Koblenz and then up the Moselle River to a little town called Polzem, which is on the French and Luxembourg border. And we did a three-day hike from Polzem to Wasserlich, or essentially to Trier, which is a historic town, hiking about 38 miles in 3 days. So we were a little bit hesitant as to whether we would be able to do that because we hadn't done any hiking more than about 5 or 6 miles all spring, but we did. And so basically the hiking was starting in little villages close to the river and then hiking up to the rim of the canyon, the Moselle Canyon, and kind of going up and down. And then at the end of the day, going back down to a village for the next night's stay at a hotel, and then repeating that again 3 days in a row. And this was arranged through a company called Eurohike. And essentially they would take our luggage to the next hotel, and then we'd set off with our little day packs and rain gear, which we definitely needed on this trip, and went off hiking. So in this particular village picture, we see the small village of Helfant in the distance. This is kind of the typical countryside, agricultural fields, and then forests of deciduous and coniferous plants. And so next. And I should mention that especially the first 2 days, we didn't see a whole lot of native plants. In Europe, a lot of the forests are managed heavily, and so there's a lot of introduced, well, I should mention that we saw a lot of plants that are weeds here, like I believe that's Torillus there on the left, to the left of the orchid there. That's a weed here, but I believe it's native in Europe. Don't know if it's native in Germany or not. But didn't see a whole lot of what I would normally call a native plant first couple of days. This is the greater butterflied orchid, which we saw a couple of times en route, and quite pretty. It's related to our bog orchids here in the States, in the Pacific Northwest. Next. Also, there's a lot of the hiking was through wheat fields and or lots of vineyards. So they grow lots of white wine there in this particular region, and so there were a number of farmers who were trying to do natural gardening, and so they would set up these big insect hotels for the native pollinators, and some of them went so far as to have all kinds of media, soil and twigs and just all kinds of ingenious things for housing these great insects that pollinate our plants. Next. I believe this is native in Germany. It's supposed to be in Europe at least. Blue bellflower. So this is one of the more common plants we saw all along the trail, pretty much every day. Those are pretty good size, probably about 2.5 inches across. That mouth of the flower, stand about a foot to 2 feet tall. Quite pretty. And you can tell again, it was pretty rainy at times during our trip there from the spots on the flowers. Next. And then here is Paris quadrifolia, which is herb Paris. And it is basically a kind of a non-showy 4-leaf trillium. And so it's a trillium relative, 4 leaves. Kind of can see the petals there. They're really small and narrow. This one's kind of really going more into fruit than anything else. This was on our third day where we had quite a bit more, unique flora, I guess you might say, during our hiking. Next. And we made a detour off of our hike to take a little bit longer loop to visit a place called Orchid Paradise. And so this is a big fallow field. I'm not sure whether this was farmed at some time or not, but it's protected now. There's lots of hawkweed and oxeye daisies, or close relative. There's ripgut and cheatgrass and all these native plants, which are horrendous things here. Some scabiosa, and I see some pink clover in the image. Just acres of this near Orchid Paradise. Next. And as we got close to Orchid Paradise, all of a sudden we started seeing orchids and got excited. And so this is the pyramidal orchid, Anacampus pyramidalis. And so this is probably to me, was the showiest one there. There's also quite a bit of Sanguisorba, which is kind of the darker kind of oblong heads that you see around it there. And then a bit of Galium bedstraw, or one of the other bedstraw genera there. Next. And here's a lady orchid to my best knowledge here, quite showy. They're about a foot and a half tall, really showy spikes, kind of white lower petals, with lots of purple spotting. Quite interesting. Next. And I'm assuming this is a bee orchid, Ophrys epiphyra. Unfortunately, in Germany at least, I couldn't find a lot of online data other than iNaturalist, which is incomplete, and no online texts to take all the bee orchids and identify them. So this is, take the take the ID with a grain of salt here, but quite a showy little orchid. Flower. The slipper down there is about the size of your little pinky nail. And there were a couple of other Ophrys orchids there. There was a spider one, and I can't remember the common name of the other one that was there. Next one. And this is a rare butterfly on again on one of the Sanguisorbas, a burnet, and this is the green underside blue, which is quite vibrant. So I was lucky to get a chance to see it and photograph it. So next. And so basically they have a trail that goes around the periphery of this protected area. It's it's like the best limestone orchid meadows in Germany, I guess, and probably about 10 acres or so in size. And so we tried our best to stay on the outside, on the trail and not go in. This is the only place where we saw people during our 3 days of hiking. And unfortunately, there were a number of people with big lenses, tromping out and trampling orchids and things, getting pictures. So we tried to at least show that Americans can be, good in terms of the environment here. There's pyramidal orchids, there's scabiosa, there's bellflowers in this photo, along with a bunch of grasses and things. And there were lots of orchids under the kind of the shady sides of the shrubs and things like that, which made photographing kind of difficult, especially, when I had about 135 millimeter lens and you're 15 feet away from a plant. So, okay, running out of time. Okay, next. Aquilegia vulgaris. Some of you may have this in your gardens. It's European columbine. Unfortunately, my native ones hybridize with this, and then pretty soon the native ones disappear. Next. And a native sage, meadow sage, Salvia pratensis. And next, a close-up of the pyramidal orchid Anacamptis pyramidalis. The site also has the yellow gentian, which unfortunately was not in bloom, but those get to be about 2-3 feet tall and, just humongous plants, compared to our ordinary gentians. Weren't in bloom at that particular time. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We'll go ahead and move on to the next speaker, who's Mark. Mark.
Hi guys, my name is Mark DeForge, and gotta say I'm really impressed by the presenters and you guys. You're very knowledgeable and just amazing photos of all the flowers. I'm not a botanist, I'm enthusiastic, but I don't know as much about flowers as you guys do. What I wanted to tell you about is my 25-year journey doing a native plant restoration on my property. This is a photo taken in the 1930s, and it shows this area as development happened. The dark colored trees are going to be Oregon white oak. The lighter colored trees are going to be ash. This is a Weibel Creek, which is in the McKeag Creek watershed, which goes in the Tualatin near Hillsboro. Next slide, please. So I started my restoration work about 25 years ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I finally met a woman, April Olbrich, for the Tualatin River Watershed Council, and she was able to really help me out, and I really appreciate her guidance. She worked with Clean Water Services and was able to provide me with trees. And so this is the condition that my creek was in when I first came there. You can see it's on the positive side, it's connected with the floodplain. On the negative side, the reed canary grass has been introduced by dairy farmers, and now it's so dense that the ash trees cannot germinate, and it's gradually becoming a reed canary desert. And so at my peak, I was putting in about 1,000 trees a year, and gradually started to have some success. Next photo, please. This is what it looked like a couple years later, and you can see trees starting to emerge over the reed canary grass. And the way you treat reed canary grass is basically you want to create shade, and you want to create a closed canopy that will allow the native plants to outcompete the reed canary grass. And we're starting to have lots of success. My goal was 2,500 stems per acre over here in the wetland. Next slide, please. And here's what happens when you put in 2,500 trees per acre. A beaver will come in and make a dam out of your trees. And I gotta say, I'm not upset by this, because this is what a functioning wetland in the Willamette Valley looks like to me. Is you have a forested wetland, a beaver will utilize it, build a dam, raise the water level, kill the ash trees that you see behind you, which create snags for birds, create habitat for fish. Eventually the beavers eat all the resources in the area. They leave the area, the dam fails, water drains, and a beaver meadow is created, and the trees gradually get reintroduced. This cycle will take decades, but we got to kind of see it happening, and it was really nice. And let's see here, the beaver have anything to do with reed canary grass? No. If there's reed canary grass that's dominating your wetland, the beavers will not be there, because it's not a food resource that they can eat. Next slide, please. And this is a silly picture. My dad bought a canoe in the 70s for $100, and I'm using it to paddle along on my beaver pond now. And he also made that paddle there. He's a pretty talented guy. All right, next slide, please. All right, so that's the story of my wetland restoration, and I was also doing an upland prairie restoration. And this one, Clean Water Services wasn't as interested in helping me out, so I had to do it myself. And I ran into Linda Boyer of Heritage Seeds, and she was an amazing resource. And I started buying trees from her, seeds from her and plugs from her and other wholesale nurseries, and just started reintroducing native plants here. And here you can see, this is Sidalcia malviflora, is primarily what you're looking at. There'll also be camas and buttercup and Sidalcia campestris, which is the meadow checker mallow in this picture, and you can see some mature oaks behind you. Yeah, so this was a fun journey. And I also collected a lot of seeds from our neighbors that had remnant prairie populations and kind of tried to reintroduce them on my property. And yeah, so, but unfortunately, the story doesn't have a happy ending. Washington County took the property from me this year to put on a parking lot for a data center. So all these are going to be bulldozed in about 12 weeks. So I'm kind of bummed about that, but it's been a pretty fun journey. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate all the help from everyone. Yeah, next slide, please. And this is just another little picture of my favorite flower, buttercups. Looks like there's some Potentilla gracilis in there, maybe a larkspur. Yeah, next slide, please. And yeah, so I had to move away from Washington County, but here is a photo of a new property I bought in Klickitat County. So I don't know anything about gorge flowers, so I went up there with Drew from Humble Roots Nursery, and we had a good time. And I'm going to be spending some time trying to protect those oaks from Douglas firs that are trying to move in there. I guess I'll just kind of leave it with a note that, you know, anyone can do restoration. It doesn't take fancy equipment, just maybe a shovel, some pruners, and you know, some enthusiasm. I guess some of the advantages I had would be I could spend 365 days a year thinking about one property, as opposed to, I imagine a lot of people here have done restoration work and they need to spend time thinking about hundreds of acres, and I didn't need to do that. So it was a fun journey. And anyway, I look forward to being part of this club. I'm a new member here, so yeah, thanks for letting me join.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see. I got one question, direct message to me. Yeah, Carolyn wants to know if you had trouble, as you were doing restoration work, if you had trouble with deer damage.
Yes, deer are on the property, and I would say, though, that I just kind of accepted the browse damage. I didn't ever protect trees from like, I didn't put plastic around trees or anything. I would try a little camouflage, you know, like in my early restoration efforts, I would line up willows in a row, and that was just like a smorgasbord for animals. And so I had to be a little bit more clever going forward and kind of have randomized things to make it a little bit more challenging. And I'll also toss out, if anyone wants to try and salvage plants from this property, we can try and organize something.
I know I would definitely be interested, and I've talked to some folks who have expressed interest in starting a native plant salvage group or effort. There's a nonprofit in Washington that does that, but I don't think there's anything in the Portland area that does that. If anyone knows of anyone that does that, please put them in the chat, but I'd definitely be interested to connect with you on that work.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate your sharing your photos.
Sure.
I can move on to the next person. I think it's me. I'm the last presenter this evening. So go ahead and start my timer. So I wanted to share tonight some photos from hikes I took this spring in April and May in an area that I've seen geologists call the Tillamook Highlands in Tillamook County. This area is right around Highway 6. This is the view from the Kings Mountain Trail, which is a very steep trail. It's a popular like conditioning trail because of how steep it is. And I believe mountain climbers hike it and use it to train. Here's another photo. And what's interesting about this area to me botanically is like these large number of basalt outcrops that occur here, and they harbor a lot of uncommon and rare, sometimes endemic plants that I find really cool. So this area, the Tillamook Highlands, as I've seen geologists call it, is represented in this like figure 6 square there. And it is part of what used to be a continent called Silesia that crashed into what is now North America some 55 million years ago, I believe. And it brought existing basalts with it. And then that activity also generated new basalt flows as well. So the blue on the map represents basalt flows that occurred after the collision of Silesia into North America. And on these basalt flows, you can find a lot of really interesting cliff gardens, or what sometimes people call rock gardens, that have not really been touched so much by deforestation. Here you see that splash of yellow is a bunch of monkey flower growing kind of in a seep in the rock. A lot of other flowers visible too. This is just harsh paintbrush. It's pretty common. It's something I associated more with the Cascades, but is pretty common in the Tillamook Highlands as well. Phlox diffusa, or spreading phlox, is not super common in the Coast Range, but does occur in these high elevation sites in talus in the Tillamook Highlands. And one of the reasons the Tillamook Highlands is so interesting to me is because of the habitat that exists there for plants I normally think of as only growing in the Cascades at higher elevations. This is one of those species that you can find there. Another is Luina hypoleuca. The common name escapes me. This is in the aster family. This occurs in the Cascades more in southern Oregon, and then has a disjunct population on the Olympic Peninsula as well. But the leaves are just super pretty and very distinct because of those velvety hairs. Lomatium martindalei, or it's sometimes called Cascade lomatium or Coast Range lomatium. Those are very common species that can grow just in crevices and this bare rock with very little substrate, sometimes at near 90-degree angles. And I love that about this species. And so those were some more common species, but like I said, these basalt outcrops also harbor some rare species as well. And we actually, one of them is this Saxifraga cespitosa. It's not too uncommon, but it's more of something I think of as like occurring at higher elevations. So this is something you might see on Saddle Mountain, but you can see it around like 3,000 feet. It has these cute little fuzzy leaves that distinguish it from Saxifraga vespertina. It's not flowering in this, but the flowers are really cute as well. I was really excited to find this species in the Tillamook Highlands because I think this is the first documented occurrence of Dutchman's breeches in Tillamook County. So this is known to grow in Clatsop County on Saddle Mountain. And then it does grow in the gorge as well, but it's more of an East Coast, Eastern North America species. And I was just so thrilled to find it growing in Tillamook County as well. This is also this honeysuckle, Lanicera utahensis. This I think is also the first documented occurrence of the species in Tillamook County. This was on Rogers Peak, which I believe is the highest peak in the county at around 3,900 feet. The peak itself is not terribly interesting. It's kind of overgrown by second growth noble fir, but I just thought this was a lovely flower. Yeah, this is also I think this was also a first documented occurrence of a species for Tillamook County. Hydrophyllum occidentally. I don't have a flowering shot here, but you can see how the long leaves with the speckling make it pretty distinct from other species of water leaf that you might see, like Hydrophyllum tenuis, I think is the most common one, Pacific water leaf. And then we saw a much better photo of this species from Greg, but I was excited to find this as well. This is the dwarf cliff primrose. I think Androsici is the genus it's currently in. Depends on who you ask. I think Oregon Flora maybe still has it in Douglasia, but it's got those lovely 5-petaled pink flowers. And again, Greg had a much better photo of this species as well. But this fringe petal kitten tails, it looks pretty similar to the kitten tails that occur in the gorge, which is Veronica mazurica stellaris. But I think I did some research on it, and it's most closely related to a species that occurs in Idaho. I wasn't sure. I think I labeled this as, I posted this on iNaturalist as Viola palustris, and someone corrected me and said that a recent paper had come out. Someone had done some phylogenetic taxonomy work and described a new species, Viola pluviae. So I'm not sure which one this is. I haven't done my research. It was only just described, I think, in the past few years. And there's, but there's one of the two. This is just growing in kind of a seepy, marshy area. Oh yeah, and much of this area is owned privately, so it is surrounded by Tillamook State Forest, but a lot of it is owned privately, and so you see these huge swaths of clear cuts. I think that's a major reason why this area is not hiked more and botanized more. But I encourage people to kind of see past the clear cuts and look at the botanical diversity that does exist there, because a lot of it is really under-researched and could use some more attention. So that's it for me. Let's see, I see one question from Lisa. What was the purple blossom and the other stag-leafed one? Not sure, I don't remember the phrase stag-leafed. The fox? I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Lisa. If you want to provide more detail, I might be able to answer that question. Okay, you're unmuted, Lisa.
Now I think I'm unmuted. Move later in your slides. That one. Nope, back.
This is the dwarf cliff
back up.
primrose.
That one. See the purple?
That's cardamony.
Okay, I look like a nutwork, so yeah. Anyway, yes, toothwort. Okay, so that's what's peeking through there.
Yes, that's cardamony. I'm not sure. It does look like cardamony nataliae to me, but cardamony Pattersonii is known to occur in the area as well. That's Saddle Mountain bittercress. And I haven't taken the time to learn the genus, so I'm not sure which it is.
Well, those are awesome. One of the comments I made that I just found out tonight is that Linda Hardison of the Oregon Flora is going to start integrating some of the observations from iNaturalist, so instead of an herbarium sample, you would have a photo like what you provided. So that's coming next year.
Great, that's great news.
Yeah,
thanks for
so you will be, that's exciting for you.
Yeah, and Paul shares a reminder to donate to Oregon Flora. I rely on Oregon Flora a lot. It's an amazing project with an amazing website. For those of you who aren't familiar, it makes all of the Oregon State University herbarium accessions available online, and has a ton of other great information available as well, and it's definitely a worthy cause if you're a botanist looking for a nonprofit to give to. And they operate on a shoestring budget, so they definitely need the help.